Welcome to Tibalt's Apprentice. I know I've been promising some Commander content for a while now, and to that end, we are getting around to it. Some of you know that I've been dealing with some other life situations, so thanks for your patience. But it's time to talk about Zevlor the Exile. This is a very fun deck. I have to thank Brian. Thank you very much for this, Brian. Brian has a knack of finding decks for me to play that I enjoy playing more than the decks that I choose or build myself. Kind of a superpower of his. So I appreciate that. He's responsible for some of my decks like the Mathis deck, the Reaper King deck, a couple of my favorites. But anyhow, this is a new one. It's a fun one that is great to play against and requires a little bit of work, though, in a good way. It's fun. It's a group hug deck, which fills a niche that I have been sadly lacking in my decks. So I'm just going to pick out 10 cards that do more work in this deck than you would expect. Some of these things are going to overlap, so I'm going to try to keep it brief. Most importantly, the deck list is down below. It could be had for a reasonable price. Of course, if you are looking for any cards, of course, I'm going to say, stop by TCG Player and look up Dark Ritual and find your cards there first. If not, you can always buy on TCG Player using the code Tibalt's Apprentice, all one word. Anyhow, that's not what you're here for. You're here to hear about how this deck works. One of the cards that is an absolute workhorse in this deck is Retreat to Coral Helm. I've been lucky enough to play this card, I want to say, every time that I played this deck. I know that makes it suspicious and people will start checking me for sleight of hand. But the Retreat to Coral Helm is great because of the landfall trigger. Playing the lands that are in here will give you multiple land drops in a single turn, if that becomes important. And the untap a creature. We have several other cards that I'm going to talk about that do this same thing, that untap a creature, allowing you to use Zevlor's ability multiple times during a turn. And that becomes important. But almost more important than that is the scry ability. The ability to see the cards that are coming up and stack your deck accordingly. Absolutely priceless in this deck. This deck is kind of a stealth deck in that it has that scorpion sting thing where you're looking at the pinchers and all of a sudden you get hit by a tail from behind. This deck requires a little bit of setup. To that end, you appear to be dirtling around and not necessarily doing anything. And upon first glance, people tend to overlook how powerful that ability can be to duplicate, not just duplicate, but in sometimes up to 3 times doing that spell. You're going to choose a lot of things that just say single target. So this isn't going to be good against a single player. But playing against multiple players and getting all of them to suffer some of these effects is truly priceless. Clever Conjurer is another card that works well in this deck that allows you to untap target permanent not named Clever Conjurer. You can only activate it as a sorcery, and again, since we're playing this in a commander deck, you're only going to get 1 activation of that. But using your Retreat to Coral Helm or a Vizier of the Tumbling Sands is going to now allow you to untap another target permanent. You notice it says target permanent. It doesn't say non-land permanent. So sometimes when the mana is a little bit tight, you can use this to free yourself up a little bit. The Kelpie Guide also does the same thing in allowing you to untap another permanent that you control. Or you can tap a permanent and only activate this if you have more than 8 lands. Sometimes that's going to be the thing that you need to push something else through. It's also a bargaining chip. You play a political game, you're not going to have a lot of creatures that you're necessarily going to attack with. A lot of your creatures in this deck, or rather, are going to be utility creatures. You're going to rely on your instants and sorceries. With that in mind, sometimes you can make a play or offer to let somebody else get through if there's somebody else that's a potential problem at the table. Chakram Retriever is another one that whenever you cast a spell during your turn, you can untap target creature. All of these things, having untap abilities, can be used to advantage during your turn. Setting it up so that instants and sorceries can be played on their turn. So you may get a spell off with Zevlor on your turn, untap him, and have him ready for that counter spell or something that's on their turn. I'm going to talk about Rousing Refrain, and I'm going to tell you, you are never going to get the value out of it that I did. That may not be the case, but anecdotally, the last time I played this, another player at the table, a friend of mine, was able to cause us all to draw 43 cards out of our commander deck at a time. I still held those cards. He and Brian still held those cards, allowing me to cast the Rousing Refrain for a total of, I believe after it was done, 200 red mana, which I completely wasted by dumping into Rakdos Returns, doing a 200 point damage to each opponent, and having that person discard 200 cards. Unfortunately, it didn't work out for me because they had a negate spell, which countered their spell that was going at them. That did knock Brian out of the game that time. Anyhow, that was fun. Followed it by a Rakdos Charm, where I caused all of his creatures to do damage to him, forcing him to kill me immediately on the spot because of his Goblin Bombardment. But anyhow, that's anecdotal. Point is, Rousing Refrain can give you mana, and can give you mana in unimaginable quantities. Regardless of that, though, it is a card that is going to be a workhorse in this deck. Some other cards, and I've got 4 more to go through. They're simple. They're relatively straightforward. Swarm Intelligence. Whenever you cast an instant or a sorcery spell, you may copy that and choose a new copy for that. Because this is targeted, but because of Zevlor's ability, it allows you to stack multiple times. Double Vision, another enchantment. When you cast that first sorcery, you get to copy it an extra time. This is great because people tend to get blindsided by these things. I've noticed a lot in both the places that I play locally, people are playing a lot of solitaire. They're focused solely on what their deck can do and doing it before you can. So anytime you play interaction, it's going to throw a wrench in their gameplay. And this deck suddenly casting multiple spells out of nowhere really is a lot of fun. It does take, and I'm going to stress this, it's not for a beginning player because it does take a bit of planning and strategy. Wizards of Thray allow you to cast your sorcery spells as though they have flash. So that's going to free up your time so you don't necessarily have to plan your sorceries. But again, that's one card that you don't always pull. Obviously, Goblin Electromancer and a few other cards in here are going to reduce the spell's cost. But this deck tends to be reactive. So you're going to spend your first few turns setting up your board as best you can. And then you're just going to look for an opportunity to take advantage and switch the game, just flip the table, change everything to having it be your favor. Anyhow, at that point, thank you for taking the time to listen to me. Look at the deck list below. Any suggestions you might have would be welcome within the comment section. Any other decks you would like to see me talk about, that could also be put in the comment section. If you've got anything out of this video, if you enjoyed it at all, please consider liking, commenting, and subscribing. It would be greatly appreciated. In the meantime, thanks for joining me this time, and look forward to talking to you next time.